Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival's program, Lurking in Plain Sight, Crime Fiction Beyond Borders. My name is Heather Young. I'm a mystery writer whose books also, you could say, run up against the boundaries of crime fiction, and I'll be moderating this panel. I have a couple quick announcements before we begin. First of all, please silence your cell phones. And second, our authors will be signing books after the panel at Pegasus Books, which is directly behind this venue. Their books are great. You should all buy them.
Hey, Pegasus!
And the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask our fabulous panelists some questions about their books and about their craft. And then we're going to have a little chat about what this panel is supposed to be about, the boundaries of crime fiction and where they might lead us and how a book might fit in them or not fit in them. And at the very end, we'll have some time for questions from you, the audience. All right, with that, I will just go ahead and get started with some questions. Oh, no, let me introduce my panelists first. Ritu Mukerji, to my left, was born in Kolkata, India, and raised in the Bay Area. She received a BA in history from Columbia and a medical degree from Stanley Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. She has been a practicing internist in Marin for 15 years. Her debut, Murder by Degrees, was a 2024 Edgar Award nominee for Best First Novel. Nancy Kim, in the center, is the New York Times best-selling author of What We Kept to Ourselves and The Last Story of Mina Lee, a Reese's Book Club pick. Born and raised in Los Angeles, she now lives in the San Francisco area. Jason Powell, all the way over yonder, is a New York City firefighter whose work has been published in Slate and on numerous online writing platforms. When he's not fighting fires or writing, he's cooking his famous steak Alfredo linguine or lost in the pages of a good book. No Man's Ghost is his first novel. So I'd like to start out with everybody. Can you just give everybody just sort of a little elevator pitch about your book, like what it's about, why everyone should buy it? Rita, can I start with you?
So, Murder by Degrees is a historical mystery. It's set in 1875 Philadelphia. It's at one of the first medical schools for women in the United States. And our protagonist, Dr. Lydia Weston, is a professor and anatomist who is immersed in the life of the college until one day when a young patient of hers disappears. And when the young woman's body is dredged out of the Schuylkill River, she is drawn into the police investigation. And so using her clinical skills, she is really drawn into this investigation and soon becomes the target of the killer as well. And I think of this book as a just suspenseful, twisty mystery, but it draws on a lot of inspiration from the really inspiring real-life women who lived and worked during this time.
All right, Nancy, give us your best shot.
I had no idea it was going to be this. Okay, so What We Kept to Ourselves is about a working-class Korean-American family in Los Angeles that unravels when the mother disappears and a dead stranger is found in the backyard. It's a novel that alternates between, it begins in kind of a pre-Y2K sort of 1999 setting, and it alternates with the 1970s. It follows the life of a family that it's kind of making its way in America, and its very allegiances either to the South or to the country or to the labor market, and all of the ways that twists things up. It is about family, identity, secrets, stories, and unexpected friendships. So it's kind of a family saga, but it's got elements of mystery and suspense, a little bit of romance. Some people have called it, my publicist called it a Y2K historical novel, which I had never, I mean, you know, it's so funny, these genre labels that get, and it's all to kind of serve the algorithm. But I really see this as a character-driven family saga that plays with genre, because I think, you know, genre, like a lot of borders, are really kind of, you know, increasingly irrelevant these days. Right. And so in a lot of ways, the structure of the novel and the format of it, I think, represents the sort of inner life and the politics of the book. in a lot of ways.
All right, Jason, last but not least.
Did I do okay?
Oh, you did very well. You were not, the buzzer did not go off. You're fine.
There's a saying in the fire service, in every fire academy in the country, let no man's ghost return to say my training let me down. So No Man's Ghost is about a probationary firefighter's first week in the firehouse in New York City when his firehouse is experiencing a chronic false alarm call that eventually turns into a fire. So it's like a twist on the Boy Who Cried Wolf scenario, while this probationary firefighter is battling both his new career and his nerves and this crazy guy who's starting fires to get back at his wife.
Yes. All right, so everyone, I want the next question to go to all of you, and we're just going to jump into the deep end right away. To the extent you feel comfortable sharing, can you tell us how your own personal experiences or background informed your books? Nancy, we'll start with you. Like, we're just going to rotate who goes first randomly.
That's an easy one for me. I grew up in a Korean American working class family in Los Angeles. I am very much informed by the communities that raised me. So all of my characters are within communities of color. They are working class. They represent people from gardeners to gardening store owners to women who own stores within swap meets. So this is the kind of world that was very important for me on a sort of personal and political level to see represented, because we don't see enough working class Asian American stories in the world, and there are so many working class Asian American people and immigrants in our country. And so I have always been informed by writing things that I didn't have to spend a lot of time in the library to write my books. Even though I love the library and I get a lot of books from there, I didn't have to do a lot of research, because for me, this was kind of my world that I wanted to write a love letter to. This is Koreatown. This is, my first book, The Last Story of Mina Lee, is about a single working class Korean American mother. My mother was that single working class Korean American mother. And so even though nothing in my book actually happened in real life, the characters, the landscape, the themes that I've been thinking about my whole life inform the novels.
All right, and Jason, it might seem that the answer to this question may be pretty easy, but I want to hear it from you.
Yeah,
How does being a firefighter in New York kind of inform the story you're telling?
Yeah, my book is a cheat. It's like I could have written about myself and just changed the name. Nothing that happens in the book happened in real life, but I was writing about a new firefighter when I was a new firefighter, so it was easy to do. I'll say this, since we're jumping into the deep end quick. When I was a new firefighter, 18 months into my time in the firehouse, 3 months into my time in the firehouse, 18 months in the career, including the time in the academy, one of my coworkers died at a fire that we were fighting on the set of Motherless Brooklyn, the movie. Oh. And it was a sad experience, and it was terrible, but the way the city treated us, the way citizens came up to us, the way other firehouses came up to us, the way other fire departments around the country treated us was amazing. And that sense of like community, that the fire service, once you're part of the fire service, you're part of a large community countrywide, if not worldwide, is sort of what I wanted to portray in the book. Charles wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting it. I knew that people who found out about it would sympathize with us, and they would be there for us, and there'd be support. And then it would pass, and it would be just something that happened in that just happened. But it wasn't like that. For months, we didn't have to buy a meal because people were donating food every day. It's just, the fire department is nothing at all what I expected it to be. And so much better. And I wanted to try and give that image in the book.
Well, I will say this, like one thing that comes through really strongly in Jason's book is this sense of the men in this firehouse being a family, like willing to die for each other, willing to lift each other up. It's really very moving. Ritu, I know you're a doctor, but I feel like there was more than just being a doctor that went into this story. So would you like to share?
Yeah, so as Heather said, I am a doctor, and I had been a medical student in Philadelphia where the book is set. And but despite those two things, I had no idea of the existence of this historic women's medical college founded by the Quakers in 1850 that was educating women, training them, women students, faculty, along the same lines and rigorous curriculum as the men. And that to me, as a modern day doctor, as a woman doctor, was so deeply inspiring. Some of the real life stories of these women just really prompted me. I thought I could set a wonderful mystery novel in this place. And so a lot of it, people ask me often, well, some of the characters in the book, like, were they based on your patients or your own experiences? And I do remember when I was writing the book, one of my older patients sort of gave me a sidelong look and said, "You're not writing about us, are you?" And so, no, but I knew that writing about a doctor, I could draw on my own experiences in a more, global way, just what it feels like to examine a patient and to show compassion. And I think I infused or tried to infuse a lot of that in the book and the character.
So it does sound like from all three of you, your backgrounds made the book in a way easier to write. But were there any ways in which it made it harder? Just jump in if you've got a way in which being a firefighter or a daughter of Korean immigrants made the book harder to write. Go.
Yeah, it made it harder to write because my second novel took me almost 20 years. My first novel took me almost 10 because I was working jobs to survive. The economic material circumstances of my life from a working class background, having immigrant parents, and choosing a life in the arts and in writing, I think made it, the challenges there were that I didn't have the sort of support either financially, emotionally. I was in, MFA programs that were mostly white. I was in where people were reading stories that were different from the stories that I read. And so in a lot of ways, I was much more adrift than I think it would be if I had come from a family that offered me more stability, and if I lived in a society that I think provided me more of a foundation for my work.
Yep.
But I was very lucky. I went to UCLA, and shout out to them because UCLA Asian American Studies program, again, is like the first exposure that I had to Asian American literature. And this was when I was like in my early 20s. And to think that I had to wait that long to see stories like mine live on bookshelves, And so for me, I feel like everything took longer because of the way my background informs my work. I think it would have been easier for me if I had written work that was maybe more comfortable and less challenging in the sense that I followed one particular genre line, or I was easy to kind of market in that sense, or I was telling stories that kind of fit stereotypes about Asian Americans, like model minority myth, or stories that kind of exoticize their experiences. But instead, I was writing these really humane, three-dimensional, messy, character-driven stories, and those were kind of challenging in a lot of ways to both like the establishment and to just the everyday world that we live in. So,
I remember a reviewer of Nancy's first book called it a book that needed to be written, and I think that's very true. Was there anything anybody else wanted to add about how your background made it more difficult to write this book?
I don't think it made it difficult. One of the things that's often said whenever I meet a new firefighter from another fire department, they say about the fire service, it's the same circus, different clowns. And that every character in the book is recognizable because there's somebody like that in every firehouse. Yeah. My concern when I was writing it was that my firehouse didn't think I was writing about them.
That's what I was wondering, yes.
Yeah. And so there's no biographies. Like, there's no one to say, oh, this is obviously this person.
Yeah.
But if people identify, I can just say, oh, it's the same circus, different clowns.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with your patients, too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, I think, the actual logistic challenge of how to write a book while practicing as a doctor. I had 3 kids at home, so this was absolutely a kitchen table, work for a couple of hours early in the morning, work for a couple hours late at night. I think probably the biggest challenge, too, coming from a background without a writing career, without an MFA, not really knowing any other writers, was to just keep that momentum going. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, obviously, was just creating the historical world of the novel, which required a huge amount of research. So there was a lot of reading, too.
Yeah, the depth of research in this book is staggering. I mean, I felt like I was walking around 1875 Philadelphia. It's incredible. Yeah, it's really well done. I mean, it scares me because I'm writing a historical book too, and I don't think my book does that. So, Nancy and Jason, this is for you. Your books, they both feature very complicated male characters who are basically broken by their failure to live up to their own expectations of what a husband and a father should be able to provide for his family. I want to hear you talk about like what work you had to do to bring these characters to life. They are so complex, they're loathsome, but they're pitiable. They do bad things, but you understand why. And I just want to know how you did that. It was a marvelous feat of writing.
My mother is old. But
Can't be that
old. She's always spoken like an old lady. Like she always speaks in quotes, and she's not trying to be like philosophical. She just speaks in quotes. And once my sister was telling us about her boyfriend who was a douche, and he had treated her poorly, and for a long time none of us liked him, even before we found out that he cheated on her. And so she's telling us a story, and then she's not emotional about it, but she's telling us a story. My mother says, he hasn't done anything out of character. And that always stuck with me. Like I expected my mother to be mad, but my mother's like, what you're telling us now is what we've all expected of him because it's everything that we've ever seen. I took that, and then I took my mother's saying, which is a common saying, you never know the problems that people are going through. And my mother's forgiving of everyone, which frustrates me. So like if I tell her about someone who I'm mad at, and she's like, oh, don't worry about it, and don't just forgive them, I'm like, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. But my goal was to make this character obviously horrid, but also somebody that you can sympathize with.
Yeah.
Not necessarily empathize with, but
Definitely
sort of forgive.
Sympathize and pity, yeah.
Yeah,
Nancy, that father, oh my God.
John Kim, he's in his 60s. He's a Korean War survivor. He was split from his family during the Korean War. He's an internally displaced person, which means he was born in the North, and he fled during the war as a child, and he lost everyone, his mother and his siblings. And so we have this father who, like a lot of our fathers, go through so many things that they have no words or no space to speak their truth through, and so this father was very much, and he comes to this country and he is very loyal to the idea of the meritocracy and all the myths that he believes that if he works hard and if people work hard, then things work out for you here. But that's not quite the case for him because he works very, very hard, and in the process he's alienated from everyone in his family. And his wife disappears and he has no idea who she is or where she is, and this all hits very late in his life. And so for myself as the daughter of internally displaced people who are survivors of the Korean War, they are children of the war, I know what these silences are like within these families. I know what it's like to have a mother who at the age of 4 has experienced the horrors of watching, seeing other dead children, of seeing the worst that a 4-year-old could see, my mother has seen. Wow. Same with my father. And so I grew up in a family, and I think many of us do, that have, because we have to work so hard, do not really have the space in our everyday lives to share who we are with our children and who we really are, who those children were that were left behind during that war, who those children, were in essence that had to be kind of destroyed to survive what they did. And so my father is very much aligned, my actual real life father is very much aligned with John Kim in this novel, which isn't surprising. And so that's why it took me this long to write this book, because I started it over 20 years ago, and it took me that long to forgive my father, my real life father, in order to see the humanity. And yes, he was a flawed father. He wasn't a good one, but he was an extraordinary human being. He still deserves to have his story told. And so for me, it required a lot of emotional kind of healing and sort of recovery and trying to figure out who my parents were despite all the ways that they were erased throughout history. Either as through war, through immigration, where they came to this country, they were humiliated in so many ways on a daily level because of their accents, because of their inability to speak English, the ways they were alienated in this country. I had to, as a child of this country being born here, figure out a way to see my humanity despite a whole country who wanted to erase them. So that's why this book took 20 years. Because, it takes a lot of, it's not only the material circumstances of having to work, but also just figuring out how to see through all of the sort of things, all the information that I've been fed about who my parents are and who finally seeing who they really are as human beings, And
Well, you do a great job of that because there's terrific interiority into this man. And as a reader, you read what he's thinking and you know that no one around him understands him. And it's just heartbreaking. Ritu, I'm going to ask you a different question. Your characters are also very complex, but what really struck me is how complex the plot, the book is. I mean, it's like, I don't know. You have lots of characters. You've got minor characters. None of them are central casting. You have really intricate subplots that could actually be their own books on their own. How did you handle this, given you had like a job and some kids and trying to, did you have a big, giant, beautiful mind board in your room? How does that all come out of one person's head? How did you do that?
So if you all came to my home, I would show you in the space that I write, I in fact have a whole
I knew
wall.
I knew it.
That is covered. It's basically like index cards, and on the left side is just the different characters. I'm working on the second book now, and so I've got it all populated, and it's basically the plotted out narrative of the book from start to finish, which having gone through the first book, I know will change many, many times, but it's almost like a roadmap where I can see where I'm going. But I almost think of it, and this is the way I approached the first book, it's like, I created the world of this medical school, created the world of 19th century medicine, of 19th century Philadelphia, and then I really had to think deeply. It was almost like creating a theater set or a film set, and then you can place the characters.
It was almost like you lived there, like you were living there, walking around, that you personally, you Ritu, were living in that place.
And so then you structure, the narrative of the story, and that was by far the most challenging thing, is to sustain the arc of this narrative over 85,000 words, layering in the red herrings, creating the suspense, making sure all the clues are there, because that's fair play to the reader, right? And no one wants to get to the end of a mystery novel and feel like things are revealed that weren't there. And so that really just required a lot of, revision, which was actually quite fun because, some of the subplots, some of the characters actually didn't make it into the final cut.
Yes. Well, the reason I asked that is that that's like the biggest struggle I have is trying to make all the mystery elements come together in the end so no one's going, what the hell? I'm going to go into a couple little sort of crafty type questions before we turn to discussion of genre. Nancy, your book, and I wrote books like this too, so I think I'm going to know what you're going to say, but is a braided narrative, which is essentially when certain chunks of the book are set in one time, the present, and then you flash back to another time. And those chapters or sections are interwoven. I want to know why you chose to do it that way.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I choose the braided narrative. There's a practical reason, and then there's like an aesthetic, like philosophical reason. So the practical reason is that sometimes you feel like you're losing your freaking mind, and you get to by working on a braided. I mean, you feel like you're losing, like you're up against the wall. You're like, I have no solutions, and so a braided narrative allows you to keep moving regardless of whether or not you keep working on a novel because you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to switch to the 1970s and allow myself to breathe a little, give myself a little distance from the problems of the 1990s, and hopefully my subconscious will be doing all kinds of things, and it usually ends up coming up with solutions. So that's the practical thing. It allows me to keep moving, and especially I also have a daughter, and having a kid, your time is so limited that for me, when I have an hour to write, I need to make the most of it. So I keep moving. The second idea behind the braided narrative is that I always envision my novels as I write a lot about secrets and silences in families, so I always envision my novels as sort of impossible conversations between these characters. And so by braiding the points of view and by braiding time, I'm showing how time, the past, the present, and the future are in conversation with each other, and how those characters are in conversation with each other without even knowing it sometimes. They're doing things in the past that are going to be related to the present moment. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So my first novel, The Last Story of Mina Lee, it's takes place from the point of view of a mother and a daughter, the past and the present. And this is a mother and daughter who couldn't speak with each other for generational differences, cultural differences. And so the structure of the novel allows an impossible conversation to happen between a mother and a daughter who should have spoken, found more ways to speak with each other in real life.
Yes.
So.
Yes, that really works. Ritu, I was struck by the amount of poetry in your book, and by that I mean literal quotes from classical poetry. Your quote, I'm not even going to characterize it. Why do you, what role do you think the poetry you include in your book plays in the story? And why did you include so much of it? Beautiful poetry.
So I love to read poetry, and it was a completely selfish, wonderfully fun plot device that I got to use because the main character is she's the doctor to this young patient, but she's also a mentor to this young working class woman who's trying to educate herself. And so one of the things she does is gives her books to read, gives her books of poetry. And when the young woman disappears, and it's actually, really I felt was necessary for us to understand this young woman, because for a lot of the book, she is not part of the narrative. She's not physically present. And so in order to hear her voice, I thought long and hard about how could I do this? So there's a diary. Could it be letters? Could it be diary entries? And I thought what fun it would be, almost like a little cryptic puzzle, to have just, her inner thoughts in these little cryptic passages of poetry. And so that was just pure fun for me. I just, pulled out the Oxford book, of poetry, the big anthologies, all my favorite poets, and started cutting up little snippets. And I think in the end, it ended up kind of giving a haunting, atmospheric tone, to the novel, because you're not quite sure what's going on. In the end, when everything is revealed, it makes more sense.
I mean, the poems have clues in them. What a great way to put clues in a mystery novel in poems, because poems can mean different things to different people.
Exactly.
So you're trying to figure out what that poem is telling us. Very cool. Jason, your book, hands down, has some of the best action scenes that I've read in like 10 years. How did you approach those scenes? Did you find them challenging? How did you kind of do that?
I don't know. It was kind of a cheat also. So I feel
Yeah,
like...
but just because you fought some fires, the way those scenes are structured are compelling. So how did you do that?
When I was new in the fire service and I was telling my friends and family about a fire I went to, or anything that I went to, the third day that I was a firefighter, we delivered a baby. And it was not beautiful. it was uncomfortable. But... when I told this story to people...
We could agree with that.
When I told the story to people, the point of the story was that because I was new and because I just graduated the academy, my coworkers were saying, "Oh, you got this. You just learned this. You should be able to do it," and they didn't help me. That was the point of the story. But then I would tell, obviously, the actual act of delivering the baby, and the people I'm talking to, their mouths are open and they're like astonished by it. So for me, when I was writing the scenes, I was thinking, I'm just going to tell this how it happened. I'm going to tell everything that I felt and everything that I saw. And even though this is not the point of the story, it should be captivating.
Well, you are a great storyteller then, because that really comes through. Now I'd kind of like to open up to a little discussion about what this panel is about. When I got the title of the panel, I'm like, ooh, how do these books push the genre boundary of crime fiction? And what is crime fiction anyway? And what's mystery and suspense and thriller? So I'd love to just have a little conversation about that. Like, where do you see your books fitting in this vast, complicated set of overlapping genres?
You guys know this is a weird comparison. I hope you can follow me. You guys know the movie The Princess Bride?
Yes.
I have no idea what genre that is. I feel like it covers everything.
Right.
When I was querying my novel, a lot of agents were saying, "I love this. I just don't know where it would sit on the bookshelf." And I'm like, "What's the problem with that?"
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I understand now that you don't know how to market it, but I'm okay with if I establish myself as a name that people are coming to the books for the writing. I'm okay with not being in a specific genre. And so I think crime fiction, the genre is supposed to be focusing on the crime. I feel like all of our books are focusing on the characters. And
Yes.
the crime is just a delightful bonus.
We
I'm
all
okay
love
with that,
murder.
though. I'm okay with like blurring that line.
Yeah. Yeah. Nancy and Ritu, what do you, where do you think your book kind of sits in the grand scheme of true crimes, not true crime, but crime and et cetera?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question because I actually think mine, I would say it's a historical mystery. It's, in terms of having a detective and investigator, coming to a resolution. I think there are a lot of like very traditional elements. I would think historical mystery is probably a subgenre within mystery if you think about police procedurals, noir, all of these different categories. But, to Jason's point, I mean, you think about, the diversity and just how unique and different each of our books are. And that's, I'm a huge and avid fan of crime fiction. I read so much. And I think that, one of the best ways, what helped me as a novelist without much of a writing background was reading the depth and breadth of this genre and just the extraordinarily creative ways, this kind of loose structure or broad definition of what a crime novel is, what people can do. And so I think it's just a very interesting question, but I think there's so much potential, as far as how different stories can be told within it.
Well, yes, you'd hate to be an author who just has to follow the footprints and the blueprints to write a certain kind of book in order to get published. Nancy, when you wrote your first book, did you think you were writing something that would be put on the mystery shelves at a bookstore or not?
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeah, I
No,
wouldn't think so.
I was really writing this kind of literary, intimate mother-daughter story that begins with a death. And the genre of mystery to me is, the mother herself is a mystery. And so I use kind of elements of characterization and theme. And then I kind of use genre to explore elements of characterization and theme. So I use mystery to sort of unpack who this mother really is, even though the premise, it begins with a dead body, and we're trying to figure out,
Who killed that dead
done
body?
it. Yeah. Or, or if it was an accident or not in this case. And so I had not imagined that for myself. I found it to be a really fascinating place to end up. I think it's I feel very grateful because I think that it's wonderful to be able to pull audiences from different directions, but it can also be very lonely for us, because we don't feel like we fit in exactly. I don't feel like I fit in a lot of places, and so it's an interesting thing. I hope that the reader is kind of. I think a lot of genre is about meeting readers' expectations. And so creating
so true.
sales
Yes.
pitches that allow readers to find books quickly. But I really don't believe that, and there is, of course, that is important, but I think it's equally important to find readers that are slower in terms of how they come across books, how they talk about books, and aren't going to necessarily be interested in things that are super easy to categorize. I feel like we're creating books that are sort of resist and sort of defy the single shelf, and I actually think that's kind of cool. I mean, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also, for me, I thought I was writing a literary fiction book too, and then I realized how much better it is to be at least under some umbrella of genre, one that's very fluid, genre fluid, and allows you to be very creative, because you have like a built-in community of readers who are going to say, oh, if that's a mystery, I'm going to read it, or that's a thriller, I'm going to read it. I'm never going to be Ann Patchett. So, I just need my little tribe of people who like to read what I write, and it's a good way to find them is to be put in a genre.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. All right, I'm being told it is maybe time for some questions. Do we have any questions from the audience about craft, about the process, about books? Yes. Do we have microphones for the people? Or you can just really shout really loudly. But no, I think she's got one. No, she's got one.
Testing.
Hello, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, question. I've come here today both as a person who likes to read a lot of genres, but I'm also a recently self-published writer. And what I'm curious about is, I imagine you all have agents, but what was your initial experience with marketing yourself and kind of trying to find that little, not a cult, but that group of people who like your books? What were your early stage trying to get your name into the nexus?
Thank you very much for asking that, because that was on my list and I didn't get to it. So, panelists, what was it like launching yourself into the literary world? How did it feel? Was it hard? Was it different than what you expected?
You know, it's interesting. I think, as an avid reader, someone who's spent her entire life in bookstores and libraries and doing a lot of reading, I think I had some expectations of, what it was going to be like. And that's still a learning process for me. The book was published in October. I think that, the path was eased certainly with an agent and the publisher helped arrange, like a book tour and appearances and such. And I think in many ways it was definitely targeted towards a mystery audience. But there's so much that you, as the writer, there are ways that you can connect with readers and, be that at places like this or in bookstores or by doing interviews or different things. And that's honestly still a learning process for me. But I will say, after 6 years of writing this book as a very solitary pursuit, coming out and connecting with readers and finding people, as we talked about, who love mysteries or they love historical fiction or whatever, something about the book resonates with them. That's just been the most gratifying part of the whole process.
Have
felt
you
like-
found that difficult?
I knew that I didn't want to self-publish. I wanted to be traditionally published. So before I sent out my novel, I wrote several short stories and had those published, or those were accepted for publication. So I could have a resume. Like I'm saying, someone else besides me thinks I'm a good writer. So you should read my my submission. But also, every time I meet somebody and I tell them that I'm a writer, they say, "Oh, I'm going to write a book one day." Like when they have time, they're going to write a book and they'll get published. And they'll say, "You should write about my life." And they'll say, like, "If you knew my story, it'd be fascinating." And it might be true. But the question is, why would anybody read it? Like, how are we going to know that's fascinating? So I feel like when you are presenting yourself, you're presenting yourself to an agent that has thousands of people presenting themselves to him. What's making you stick out? So your story might be excellent, and agent might love it. Your future agent might love it, but they're not going to know until they think that you're someone that they want to work with or want to know more about. So whatever's interesting about you is what you need to push forward, and then let your book be the second everything.
That's great advice.
I guess just as words of encouragement, I'm a big believer. It really only takes one yes to change things, But you've got to put yourself out there to get that one yes. And so the reason why I say that is because I'm a person who I think so. It took me 10 years to publish my first novel, and then almost 20 to publish my second one. And in the meantime, I think there was a 7-year streak where I got nothing but rejections, not only from agents but from every residency fellowship, and I remember every single one of those ones said no. I have this is before my debut, so I remember every single rejection, and so I went on like a 7-year streak of no's. Right? I mean, that's brutal. While I was married, I have mortgage to pay, I have rent to pay, I have all these things. What are you working on after being rejected so long? And so it really only took one yes. And that began, I feel like that first yes started with, I used to have this idea when I was in the MFA program that you had to publish in the most prestigious places, that you had to have certain kinds of gatekeepers say yes to you. You know what I mean? And so all you needed was the one yes in the fancy journal, or you needed to get in the New Yorker, you needed to get, or in one of the literary journals at one of the universities, you know what I mean? And those were all no's for me. But I started being really honest with myself, and I was like, you know what? This was like, I would say this is in the early, like 2011, 2012. I spent a lot of time reading online, to be honest, and back then I was reading like The Rumpus, I was reading The Toast, I was reading all of these online magazines. I was like, why don't I send to these places, that I actually read? Like, I don't just subscribe and then just get this stack of like New Yorkers that I can't get through, you know what I mean? And so I published an essay, which is not even the genre that I write my books in. And I'm a novelist, but I published an essay in Guernica, which is an online magazine online at that time. And my agent found me through Guernica, and it was a very small essay. It was probably 1,500 words. But I would say that one yes, after the 7 years of no, is the one that got all the dominoes falling, And then the next thing you know, I had an agent, then I had an editor. Then a year later, and I was writing this very small, who wants to read about, this was like undocumented Korean Americans in Los Angeles, working class, people who work at grocery stores. Like, I was like, nobody's interested in this story. And, and then it ended up as an instant New York Times bestseller. But there was 10 years of like me just like working on a dining room table, getting nothing but no's.
So 10 years from now, you will publish a book.
But, it was like resilience.
Let me see if I can get another
Right.
question in. I see another question of the gentleman in the blue cap. Where did the microphone go? Oh, there it is.
For all of you, who are your inspirational writers in your past?
Oh, that's a good question.
Donald Westlake.
Oh, I would say P.D. James, Ruth Rendell, and Henning Mankell.
There's too many. That's always a tough question for me. But
right,
I can,
give us three.
I can reread. I can read and reread anything by James Baldwin. And I love Elena Ferrante. I could reread and pick up at any of her books. I love the interiority of her books. I love Edith Wharton. So it's pretty broad. Yeah.
Yeah, for what I do, Tana French, and Kate Atkinson. Yay! Do we have any other questions? I think we can take one more question. Straw Hat Man.
Okay, can I hold it?
That's all I
Thank
see, your
you.
hats.
I'm working on a manuscript for a novel, which is not a mystery, but it has elements of that. And the real mystery is who is this character and why did she do what she did before she died?
Right.
So wondering if you have a recommendation for like a craft book or something that lays out something about the mystery or thriller or crime genre that might help me figure out how to structure that.
Oh, a craft book source that might help.
So the mystery is her life,
Or the character herself. Yeah.
but are we also trying to unpack who did it, though? No. Oh.
That's all revealed in the first third of the book.
Oh, okay.
Well, my... Oh, yeah. I would say I don't know a book like that, but my best advice is just to read a bunch of books like that. Like, honestly, that was how I learned, was just read a bunch of books, and if you found something that was sort of in the neighborhood of what you were writing, read it. And then
Harlan.
look at the agents who represent that writer to find more writers like that.
The Harlan Corbin masterclass. It's BBC Maestro, I believe, actually. That he touches on that.
Ding, ding, ding.
It's pretty good.
All right, to close up, I'd just like to quickly ask our writers what their next project is. Don't go into too much detail because they're going to throw us off the stage, but what are you working on?
So I'm working on book 2 in this. I'm continuing this as a series, and so it takes place at the 1876 World's Fair in Philadelphia. So kind of a little devil in the White City element to a crime, and the book centers on a pioneering woman surgeon who's doing a demonstration under some new anesthetic techniques, and of course everything goes awry, and she's accused of murder, and there we are. So.
All right, Nancy, what's next for you?
I'm working on book 3 in what is kind of becoming a Koreatown trilogy, and so these stories are interconnected, but they're not. They don't. They're not. They're not. It's not a. They don't rely on each other in that
Right.
sense. And it is going to be near future. It's going to deal with issues of kind of labor and what's happening and how that affects Koreatown and ethnic enclaves generally. And so, and of course, there's going to be a family, a very complicated and non-traditional family at the heart of it.
All right, what's next, Jason?
The love interest for the protagonist in No Man's Ghost is the protagonist in book 2.
Very Tana French.
I like that.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Don't forget.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being
books
here.
for sale right over there. Buy them all. Get them all signed. Have a great day.
Thank you, Heather.
That was awesome.